Hi everyone. In this video, we're going to be going over the next part of the Python crash course Jupyter Notebook, which includes functions, objects, and classes, and scoping. So we've already been using some functions. We've kind of seen how they look. We've been using these built-in functions in Python, and we use these things to kind of avoid repetition or abstract out complex parts of our code. So these built-in functions that we've been using will turn green like this. So we'll know that they're a special word. And one of them is length, LEN. So that can work for things like lists or tuples or sets or whatever. And we can get the number of elements in that variable. So in this case, our list is 1, 2, 3, 4, and the length of that is 4 items. And then another function that's built in, which is useful, is the print function, just prints out whatever we're looking at. Again, in Jupyter Notebook, it automatically prints whatever at the end of our line. Oops. So you don't need to call print to print it out in Jupyter Notebook, but it can be useful in other situations. So these all follow a pattern. They have some sort of name. They have 2 parentheses, and then we give them some arguments. And so we can look up these things in the documentation. And kind of a complex example, but one that shows some of the options available for functions is the sorted function. So we can go ahead and try using the sorted function on a list and then tell it to reverse the list. And so that sorts it from greatest to least. If we leave the reverse part out, then it sorts it from least to greatest. So this function in the documentation has a lot. So one way, we'll look at this at the end of the notebook as well, but one way to pull up documentation is question mark and then function name. So, or we can just search, say, Google for Python sorted documentation. And that brings us to the built-in functions here. And we've got sorted right here. So a couple different ways to see the documentation for these built-in functions. But we can see it looks like this. We've got iterable. So iterable is like a list or a set. And then it's got a slash. So that means anything before the slash is a position only argument. So we can only provide that by position. So we need to give the first thing to the function should be this iterable. And then the star means anything after the star is keyword only. So we can have these keyword arguments where it has a name. And so this means the star means that these are keyword only. So we need to provide these things as keyword. So if we try doing that without a keyword there, or if we try giving this first keyword, it doesn't work. So that's how we can use a keyword argument, and that's kind of what these things mean in the documentation. Also, you can see that in the function, it's got defaults. So the default for reverse is false, meaning that if we want to sort from greatest to least, we need to change that to true. So that's using functions. We can make our own functions with this def keyword for define. So we can do def space, and then our function name. Again, it's best to use camel case, I believe, for functions, just like with variables. And it's also good to name them descriptively. And then we can give arguments. So in our case, we give it this a argument, which is just an argument there that has no default. And then this argument b has a default of 12. So then we add a to b. So we can call this function just by supplying a number to the function, and that gets passed in as a. And then you can see it has this return here. So this return is going to send back this value from the function into whatever we're storing it into. So yeah, we can see 50 plus 12, 62, no problem. We can also provide these as keyword arguments. So we can say a equals 50. And that will allow us to just provide those arguments directly by name instead of by position. So those are the two ways we can do that there. So try using that function to add 1 and 1 and name both arguments. And functions are pretty important. You'll see them all over the place. It's also pretty helpful to define your own and use them. Okay, so in Python, everything is pretty much an object. It's an object-oriented programming language. So these objects have attributes, which can be either methods or which are functions, or they can be values. So that pandas data frame we made earlier has a shape attribute, which tells us the number of rows and number of columns. And then here's an example of a built-in method, or a method for the pandas data frame, which is sort values. So we can sort that by the people column and make it sort from greatest to least with this argument here. There's also ways we can, so this is a class, this data frame is a class, and so it has all these attributes. We can also make our own classes, which is a little bit more advanced and is covered in many other places. But one nice thing about Jupyter Notebooks and IPython is that we can take these objects, type them, press a period, and then hit the tab key. And might have to hit it a few times, or it might just take a while the first time. And it shows us all the options for all the different attributes and functions that we can call from that object. So that's a pretty nice little trick that you can use there. One last thing with regard to functions and classes is called scoping. So this means that variables that are defined in a function are not available outside of that function unless we make them a global variable. And you want to avoid global variables because it's not good practice. So here's an example of defining a variable in this function. And then if we call this function and then try to access that variable, it doesn't work. So if we were to make this global, which again, all right. So first you have to declare it global. I never used this, so I don't even hardly know how it works. Then you can access it. But again, this is bad practice. It can make your code really messy and confusing and cause errors. So now that I declared it global, I don't know if I can take it back. Anyway, that's an example of scoping. So instead of modifying this function to make this global, instead modify the function so it prints out the type of new variable within the function, and also modify this code block so it doesn't result in that error. So that's all for this one, a little bit shorter, just looking at functions, objects, classes, and scoping. We'll see you in the next one.